Ethiopia's parliament approves the government's move to end emergency rule. The U.S. military's plans to drastically reduce the number of special operations forces deployed on the continent. And armed with poetry and rap, South Sudan's young artists battle for peace. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. We'll have those stories in a moment. But first, Tunisian Prime Minister Youssef Chayed fired Interior Minister Lofty Brahim on Wednesday after a boat packed with some 180 migrants sank on Sunday off Tunisia's coast. The death toll has risen to at least 68, with dozens still missing. A government official speaking on condition of anonymity said Brahim was fired for failing to stop the boat and illegal boat migration in general. Most of the people on board the boat were Tunisians trying to escape unemployment and an economic crisis that has gripped the North African country since the toppling of autocrat Zain El Abidine Ben Ali in 2011. Human traffickers have increasingly moved their operations to Tunisia since a crackdown by this Coast Guard in neighboring Libya. Yemen, the poorest country on the Arabian Peninsula, continues to be a major transit point for East African migrants and refugees, many of whom are fleeing hunger and violence. Yemeni authorities have deported over 230 migrants over the last week, including 130 Ethiopian migrants from the port of Hodeida on June 2nd. The manager of Yemen's National Organization for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Response says illegal migrants are being caught and deported on a regular basis. A local official in the government-aligned city of Aden says that 15,000 African migrants are caught in the city's checkpoints each month. The mostly African migrants are willing to risk the treacherous journey through war-torn and impoverished Yemen in hopes of finding work in wealthy Gulf Arab states. Well, is change on the horizon in Ethiopia. The East African nations ruling coalition has made several pronouncements in recent days that could alter the course of Ethiopia's economy and politics. The government now says it will fully accept and implement a peace agreement with Eritrea that was signed in 2000. The Horn of Africa neighbors have been at odds for about 2 decades of a boundary dispute that triggered a war in 1998. Trouble began when Eritrea invaded what Ethiopia considered its territory. The war ended in 2000, but since then, the two countries have been in a state of what observers say is a state of no war and no peace. In another surprise move, Ethiopia's parliament approved the government's decision to lift a 6-month state of emergency 2 months earlier than planned. The government imposed emergency rule in February to clamp down on unrest sparked by a planned development scheme for the capital, Addis Ababa. The government says it will also open state-run telecoms monopoly and state-owned Ethiopian airlines to private domestic and foreign investment. Now, for more perspective on the latest developments in Ethiopia, Tsedale Lema, Ethiopia editor-in-chief and founder of Addis Standard Magazine, joins me live via Skype from Frankfurt in Germany. Good evening, Tsedale.
Good evening, Vincent.
So what has been your reaction to this rather kind of quick movement of things in Addis Ababa?
Well, it's quite indeed a rush of events, the kind of similar like what we have seen at the time when the former prime minister resigned. You know, it was followed with one event after the other. This time it's just the flip side of that rush of events happening. There are indeed, as you said, an extremely positive events. For example, the lifting of the state of emergency is quite a welcome act by the government, and also the decision yesterday to open up the economy and of course accept the Algiers agreement. These are all good signs, but we're still waiting for details on the how of all, how this is going to happen. And Ethiopians are really asking a lot of questions, and the government did not subject itself to public opinions so far. There has not been any media briefing from the Prime Minister himself, other than himself talking to in an event this morning. So we're waiting for details to come out, and I think right now the people do have a lot of questions to ask.
Yes. Now, what does this tell us? For the longest time we said the system in Ethiopia is stronger, the coalition is stronger than the individual, but it looks like the Prime Minister has so much influence. Or what do you read into all these announcements?
Well, I'll be very cautious enough to say that this is all happening single-handedly, by a decision from the Prime Minister. I think this has been the party's decision. This has been driven by the situation the party found itself after 4 years relentless protest of the Ethiopian people, the Oromo and the Amhara. They have understood that it is really essential to make the necessary changes to reform the party and reinvent itself. So this is, I think, it's still a collective decision. But you also see that in some of the decisions the Prime Minister is navigating, he's alone, I think, and he's indicating a few things. For example, in his speech today, he somehow mentioned that sabotaging the economy because there's a new Prime Minister in the office shouldn't be acceptable. So he's trying to hint that there are, things are not that unanimous. Mm-hmm. But all in all, I think it is what the EPRDF is trying to do as a collective, despite the fissures and despite the split within the party itself, and despite we not knowing where exactly is that going to lead the party next.
But besides just internally, it looks like the Prime Minister is very determined to also correct things on the border with Eritrea to create more peace. What would have prompted this? I mean, the peace agreement has been there, but nobody made this kind of move before.
Well, I think this is precipitated by a lot of pressure from outside the country. But also, this morning in his speech, he made a very compelling argument about it because, he mentioned 3 scenarios and he would choose the third one. The first one is war with Eritrea, which is unacceptable, he said. And the second one is to continue with the status quo of no peace and no war, but costly nonetheless. So he said this is not also an option. So the third one is to agree to the international binding agreement that Ethiopia has signed itself 16 years ago, and to go on and move the economy. And I think it's also dictated by the geopolitics happenings in the area, in the Horn of Africa. There are lots of activities happening, and the Prime Minister made it very clear in his first weeks in the office that rebooting Ethiopia's diplomatic muscle is one of his priorities. So it is also dictated by events happening in the Horn of Africa. Either way, I think it's a very good decision. The public are divided about it, and which is expected. People are still expecting more details to come out, but all in all, this is a very good decision that he made.
We'll keep watching. Thank you very much, Sedale, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
That's Sedale Lema, who is editor-in-chief and founder of Addis Standard Magazine. Now, tragedy struck in eastern Kenya on Wednesday when 5 police officers were killed after their vehicle hit an improvised explosive device suspected to have been planted by the Somali-based Al-Shabaab terrorist group. As Deputy Commissioner told Reuters, the police officers were conducting patrols near the Kenya-Somalia border when the vehicle hit the device. In another Al-Shabaab attack, 2 lawmakers from Somalia's semi-autonomous Hirshabelle state were killed on Tuesday in an ambush 45 kilometers north of Mogadishu. The Somali army officer says the lawmakers were riding in a car escorted by 10 soldiers in a military pickup truck when the ambush occurred. Now, the U.S. military plans to drastically reduce the number of special operations forces deployed in Africa over the next 3 years. The move could reduce the number of commanders in the continent, many fighting terrorists, from about 1,200 to 700. And military sources told VOM, although Pentagon officials have agreed on the general parameters of the reductions, nothing has been finalized. VOA's Salim Solomon spoke to Donald Baldock, a former commander of Special Operations Command Africa.
I think it's a combination of poorly written policy towards Africa, failure to understand the problem at senior levels, both in the military and in the interagency. It's also related to the casualties, although those weren't the first casualties. They just happened to be the ones that were highlighted in that particular time and space. But that is no reason to roll back. It's actually more of a reason to stay there and support our partners in these critical areas in North Africa, East Africa, Lake Chad Basin, and in West Africa, in the tri-border region of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. This is a critical time. We have about maybe 10 or 15 years, in my humble opinion. I would agree that a lack of understanding, poor policy, and a catastrophic event all came together, and people are looking to disengage rather than engage when the problems in these areas are small enough to deal with. Over time, they're going to be too large, and it will become more expensive and more problematic. And by that time, we're not going to have the strategic relationships that we need.
Do you worry that the U.S. pulling back security assistance to these African countries would create a vacuum in the possibility of China or Russia or any other military partner with different worldview would replace the U.S. and across the continent?
Yes, the 4 years that I spent in AFRICOM and the 20 months as the deputy operations officer, and when I got a chance to travel around, I would ask the partner that I was with, so what's going on over there? Oh, we're building an airport. Oh, who's building? China. Oh, what's going on over there? We're building roads and bridges and so on. So, well, who's assisting with that? Well, that's China and also Russia. Oh, okay. What infrastructure is the United States assisting you with, if any? And it's very little. Well, why? Well, it's easier to go to them than it is to come to the United States because they work on a no strings attached policy. Well, my whole thing is that they would rather work with us, and they've said that to me numerous times, that they would rather work with us, strings attached or not, because they believe in what the United States stands for, and they understand that taking shortcuts in this area politically can be very dangerous. Nothing has significantly changed that would warrant this kind of reduction in soft forces in an environment in where we rely on our soft forces to be able to lead the way, because our partners and our ambassadors are looking for small footprint, operate in remote areas to counter violent extremist organizations, train our partners to do that, work with our international partners, and create time and space so that civil administration and police can take over that job, and we can improve socioeconomic development, which is the long-term solution to stability here. We need to keep doing what we're doing, and we need to bring people in to be able to work on that long-term piece. And right now is not the time to roll things back.
Well, we want to know what you think about Africa 54, the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at VOA Vince McCory. You're watching Africa 54. In a moment, how South Sudanese youth are fighting for peace with poetry. But first, here's a recap of Wednesday's headlines.
In Libya, the UN reports that a private army advances into the coastal city of Derna in the wake of high levels of violence. Workers of a Moroccan food company protest a consumer boycott responsible for the loss of thousands of jobs. Protesters blame the government for starting the boycott. In Ivory Coast, officials blame global warming for the 3-month shortage of water in Bouaké, the country's second-largest city. In Kenya, residents of Nairobi protest a plan for a coal plant in Lamu, saying it would have a destructive impact on the environment. Finally, Ethiopia says it will now fully accept and implement a peace agreement with neighboring country Eritrea. The two countries have been in dispute since 2000.
Well, this may not be the best times for Nigerians in need of medical attention due to a nationwide industrial action by the Joint Health Workers Sector Union. To help alleviate the impact of the strike, the Nigerian Navy in Cross River State is offering free medical services to one of its host communities. Imani Ode of Channels Television has our report.
For several weeks, hospital wards and beds have been empty, and patients have found it difficult to get their healthcare needs, especially those in rural areas. This is certainly no hospital facility. It's the premises of a public school in Calabar's South local government area of Cross River State. But it will do just fine for residents of the community, here to benefit from a range of health services courtesy of the Nigerian Navy. Free eye tests are carried out, eyeglasses and drugs are being given. Laboratory equipment are also available for a series of other tests. Cases that cannot be handled during the exercise will be referred to the Naval Hospital in Calabar and attended to also free of charge.
For now, we're prepared for more than 1,000 of the host community members. And so the team will be here throughout the day and accommodate as many as possible. And for some cases that are beyond this immediate medical outreach, those people will be referred to our hospital for further treatment. Everything will be for free. Even those who will be coming for further engagement, those ones will be given transport and other facilities for free.
Also involved in humanitarian assistance is the Naval Officers' Wives Association. The organization in the state directs their attention to the needs of elderly citizens.
We're here at the Old People's Home in Calabar to, reach out to them and make them realize that they are part of the community and that we've not forgotten them. And so we were here earlier on. We had a subcommittee which came to ask them about what they needed to make sure that we're actually identifying correctly and addressing the needs that they have, as opposed to what we imagine are the things that they need.
Gestures like this, if replicated, could help cushion the impact of the medical workers' strike, but ultimately a resolution of the underlying issue in the medical sector that will guarantee quality healthcare delivery.
Well, that was Channels Television correspondent Imani Ode. Young Afghans have launched an awareness campaign called Sun Behind Curtain, aimed at overturning the customary use of the burqa, the long, loose garment worn in public by many Muslim women. Also called a chadari, the garment typically covers women from head to toe and has become a favorite piece of clothing for suicide bombers who disguise themselves as women to launch terror attacks. VOA's Afghan reporter Khalil Nourzai filed this report, narrated by Barzan Hamdad.
Some argue the traditional burqa that covers a woman from head to toe has never been part of the Afghan culture.
Under the Taliban regime, the burqa became mandatory for women. We want to shed light on the background of the burqa, because wearing burqas does not exist in our culture, and we can avoid this.
Sadat is one of the growing number of young people who reject the forced use of the burqa. Their campaign, Sun Behind Curtain, aims to raise awareness about the basic rights of women with a photo exhibit that shows how the garment has relegated women to anonymous and faceless citizens. But organizers say the sexism represented by the burqa has also been used to great effect by terrorists and by some who wish to break the law.
Using burqa and disguising as women, unfortunately many bad acts, such as adultery, robbery, and suicide attack are taking place. And unfortunately, because women are treated with respect, people wearing burqas are not checked regularly.
It is a traditional requirement for women in Afghanistan to cover their faces with a hijab. But many religious leaders say the burqa, which covers a woman's entire body and face, is not a requirement of Islamic law.
Hijab is an Islamic requirement, but burqa as a hijab isn't mandatory in Islamic laws. Burqa is a non-Islamic tradition that has been promoted in Afghan society throughout history.
But the campaign may not sit well with some Afghan women, who argue that wearing the burqa makes them feel more comfortable and more secure.
I personally feel chadari is good because it covers my body appropriately and people can't see my body when I am out.
Many women in remote villages and districts in Afghanistan are forced to wear burqas because of societal pressure and the fear of being ostracized. The Sun Behind Curtain campaign hopes to raise awareness about the practice, which has already been banned in some Western countries. Their message is that being a good Muslim does not require women to be faceless and invisible. For Khalil Nurzai in Herat, Afghanistan, this is Bejan Hamdard, VOA News.
Well, thousands of journalists are set to descend on the tiny city-state of Singapore as preparations continue for the summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. VOA's Bill Gallo is in Singapore and has more on why the island off the coast of Malaysia is a logical choice for hosting the event.
Welcome to Singapore, a tiny city-state with 5 million people, a lot of money, and no shortage of beautiful spaces.
Singapore may be cosmopolitan, but it's not really opulent here. In fact, it has all the spontaneity of a pristine shopping mall, which makes it sort of an unusual setting for a reality TV show-worthy summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un.
The meeting almost didn't happen. Last month, Trump briefly canceled the summit before saying it was back on. That's made preparations on this end pretty challenging. Amid all the summit drama, one factor that's provided some predictability is Singapore's politics.
Public protests are rare here in Singapore. In fact, the government bans unauthorized demonstrations, which could be a key factor for two world leaders who provoke strong feelings.
Singapore is also safe because it's seen as neutral territory. It has diplomatic and, recently, strong economic ties with both the United States and North Korea.
Has a lot of experience holding major conferences and gatherings of leaders. Past presidents have come here before. ASEAN has a lot of meetings here, including the recent ASEAN summit. So it was very experienced in hosting this kind of events.
Last week, Singapore hosted dozens of defense officials and other dignitaries for the annual Shangri-La Dialogue. All the attention, good for the local economy, but you won't find street vendors selling Trump Kim t-shirts in this tightly regulated city. Instead, cocktails. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un themed cocktails.
This is Trump. Trump is a bourbon-based cocktail. Bourbon being the most common ones, the common liquor you find in States. And this one is the Kim, which is a soju-based drink.
This bar in the city's business district, waiting to do big business once the hordes of international journalists arrive. Singapore proving that it may be one of the world's smallest countries, but it knows how to handle the spotlight. Bill Gallo, VOA News, Singapore.
Experts warn that spending too much time with smartphones is eroding our family and social life. The world's biggest smartphone manufacturer, Apple, has heard that warning and has announced new features for iPhones that will help people get back their lives. VOA's George Puttich has more.
And today, control of the time spent on the iPhone will come in the form of an app called Screen Time. Apple's chief of software development, Craig Federighi, says the Do Not Disturb feature will let users disconnect from cyberspace.
It's really detailed. You get deep insight on how much time you're spending, where you're spending it, and even how your use breaks down during the day.
It's a digital well-being initiative, says Brian Blau of the research company Gartner.
What that means is Apple's recognized, I think, through some pressure in the industry, that people can get addicted to their smartphones and their mobile technology.
Parents will be able to limit the time their children spend on apps such as Instagram. But Apple still wants to keep iPhone users happy, so it's also adding a host of small features, ranging from a way to insert selfies into a document,
hey everybody,
to a group FaceTime, allowing simultaneous video chat with up to 32 participants, and a walkie-talkie feature which lets you talk instantly with another person using the same app. On top of all that, there's a bit of augmented reality. For instance, it will be possible to measure objects directly on the screen.
That means you're going to be able to hold your smartphone up and get information about the world around you, exactly where you're standing at and what you're looking at.
The new software will be available this autumn, and surprisingly, it will be compatible with older devices back to iPhone 6. George Putic, VOA News.
This is the largest
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. A group of artists and musicians in South Sudan are on a mission to mobilize young people across the country through music, graffiti, and poetry to help bring peace to the war-torn nation. Arts movements Anatab, or I'm Tired in Arabic, is trying to address anger over failed promises and suppression of independent voices by advocating for peace and unity among young people through media they like, rap music, slam poetry, and YouTube videos. The group's social media campaigns are quickly shared, and it has branches in neighboring Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. Almost 90% of South Sudanese are under the age of 45. That's according to 2008 census. Well, next up, it looks meaty and tasty and even sizzles and bleeds as it heats up on the grill. But this burger is entirely plant-based, and after taking the U.S. by storm, it looks set to go global. The Impossible Burger, made by Impossible Foods based in Silicon Valley, California, has received over $400 million worth of funding from large companies in the USA, China, and Hong Kong. Manufacturers say the meaty taste is due to a molecule found in meat called heme, which is also found in plants. The company found a way to extract heme from plants to create a realistic meat-like substitute. Heme gives the burger its bloodiness and crispiness while providing the taste and aroma of meat. And that's what's trending today. Well, that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show Africa News Tonight at 1800 UTC, and in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC, Monday through Friday. Thanks a lot for watching from all of us in Washington. Have a good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. When you slip, you fall down. But how does something slip from your mind?
Slip one's mind.
Let's listen to Anna and Jonathan.
Look at this beautiful cake I made for the dinner party.
Oh no, is that tonight?
Yes? Didn't you make something?
No, it totally slipped.